Welcome to Stories from the Village of Nothing Much. Like easy listening, but for fiction. I'm Kathryn Nicolai. I write and read all the stories you'll hear on the Village of Nothing Much. Audio engineering and sound design is by Bob Wittersheim. In our show notes, you'll find links to our ad-free premium version, our other shows, and our merch and partner products. Hey, I am so glad you're here. Where is here? Have you ever wished you could live in a friendly, walkable village where you had the time to just enjoy some simple pleasures and slow living? Me too. And sometimes that's just not accessible, but we can go there together in our minds. We can take a break together and drift into a grown-up's version of Mr. Rogers' Land of Make-Believe. So, won't you be my neighbor? And before we start, just 'cause it will feel good, take a deep breath in through your nose and sigh through your mouth. Again, breathe in, out with sound. Good. Our stories today carry us into downtown Nothing Much. We'll start at the hardware store, where we'll gather a few needful things and listen in on the local gossip. Then we'll head to the bicycle shop to watch a dream become a living and strap on a helmet before the big ride. Finally, we'll stroll down to the farmer's market for Flower Day to browse the sidewalk sales and pick out blooms for the front steps. The hardware store. The gate into the back garden was squeaking on its hinges. I'd noticed it today when I pushed through it with my dogs at my heels on our way to the vegetable patch. I stopped for a moment, working the gate back and forth to see if a little bit of movement would clear the stickiness out. After all, that usually works for me. The gate was a lovely, smooth piece of walnut. I'd planed it myself and hung it with wrought iron fittings that latched smoothly into place. The squeak persisted. It would need a bit of oil, and today seemed like a good day to tend to it. I had a little list of projects, and I added the gate to it. There was the slow drip from the kitchen faucet, the slightly crooked shelf in the closet that just needed a shim to even it out, and the split in the leg of one of the kitchen chairs that could be set right with a bit of wood glue. I scratched out a list of needful things with paper and pencil and grabbed my car keys from the counter. I was headed to the hardware store. Hardware stores are long places, with shelves reaching back for miles, and that unmistakable smell that somehow manages to be on the clean side of dusty. All hardware stores seem to have it. Now, they're almost always dark and cool, even on the hottest days. And for those who like to build and mend and take things apart just to put them back together, they are as much a place to meet and discuss as they are to shop and buy. In fact, there was a small group of people standing in a loose circle at the front door, sipping coffee from paper cups and talking about which tools were the best for a particular job. I smiled as I walked past them, eavesdropping on their strong opinions. It reminded me of folks who live in big cities who like to debate on the best way to get from one side of town to another, which subway or bus or secret one-way street to turn down. We, each of us, like to be the masters of some particular thing or other. It keeps us learning. I took my list from my pocket and ran my finger down the items. I needed oil for the gate, glue and shims, and a few odds and ends. I wandered up and down the aisles. I liked looking at the boxes and boxes of screws and bolts and fittings lined up neatly, each one made precisely to be just the same as its fellows, and just one size up or down from its neighbors on either side. I passed some time picking through some woodworking tools, working out for myself how they were used and deciding if I should add them to my collection. In the back of the store were tall stacks of freshly cut wood that had its own lovely warm smell. There were shavings and sawdust on the floor, and it made me eager to make something in my workshop at home. I pushed through the swinging doors that led out to the garden center. The air was suddenly warm and a little thick, smelling sweetly of flowers and soil and mulch. There were more long rows to stroll through. These were made of stacks of cinder blocks and plywood, each inch covered in flats of perennials and annuals and pots of herbs. There was a huge, healthy, split-leaf philodendron who had just unfurled a brand new, waxy pale green leaf into the world. I stopped to touch the new leaf, to marvel at the veins and the softness. When it comes down to it, actually hugging a tree is usually a scratchy, unpleasant experience, but reaching out to touch a leaf or a petal, or to lay an open hand on bark or fruit, it feels very much like saying hello. There were tall fiddle figs and spiky arborvitaes and a sea of purple phlox. Have you ever noticed how lovely plant names are? Rhododendron and forsythia, wisteria and creeping clematis, primrose and aster and coleus, and common purslane. My arms were filling up, and soon I turned back into the shop and headed to the counter with everything I needed and a few things that I didn't, but was getting anyway. The man behind the register had owned this store as far back as I could remember, and he'd often helped me work out a plan for whatever project I had in mind. He laid everything from my basket out on the counter and had a good look at it all before he began to ring it up. You've got something loose, something squeaky, and something crooked. Am I right? We always played this game. Don't we all? I said with a laugh. Right enough, he agreed. As he packed my purchases into paper sacks, I squatted down to look at the shelves of candy bars and packets of gum and mint. Hardware stores always have lots and lots of candy to fortify you after all your hard work with something sweet. I added a pack of peanut butter cups to the counter and paid for it all and carried my sacks out to the car. On the drive home, I rolled the windows down and let the fresh summer air in. I ate my peanut butter cups and sang along to the music and thought about my list of projects and where to start. I'd fix that slanting shelf, then move into the kitchen to tighten the faucet and glue the chair leg. I'd oil the hinges on my gate and lay out my new tools in the workshop. I could take the dogs to search through the trails at the park for a good-sized piece of wood, a thick branch lately fallen from a tree that I could put on my lathe to turn and turn and turn into something. That was the promise of making and fixing in hardware stores. Mixed in with the waxy new leaves and the freshly sawn planks of wood and the nails to hold everything together, our discovery and purpose and usefulness. The bicycle shop. In the winter, I'd noticed the storefront. It was across from the flower shop. I'd been buying a dozen roses, but that's another story. I'd stepped out with them in my hand and seen the for lease sign in the window and made a beeline over to press my nose against the glass. I peered in. The day was snowy and gray, and in the dim light I could only see a dozen feet back into the space. But I could make out the wide plank wood floors, in decent shape. They might need a little work. A long counter against one wall, and tilting my face up, squinting a bit, high tin ceilings. I rested my hand on the doorknob, an old brass one that was carved, and an old-fashioned oval rather than round. It felt right in my hand. I imagined unlocking this door every day, and turning on the lights, and making this place mine. Does everybody have this dream? To some extent, at least. A shop on a bustling downtown street, your sign hanging from the door, your favorite things set out on the shelves to share with others. I'd carried this dream for years. It had started in my garage when I'd brought home some vintage bikes from a yard sale and spent a few weeks buffing their chrome fenders with fine steel wool and straightening their bent spokes. On sunny days, I worked with the garage doors open, and my neighbors followed along with my progress while they walked their dogs or jogged past. And when I was done, when they had new baskets and bells and their saddles were buffed and shiny, I rolled them down the driveway and set them, propped on their kickstands, in the front yard. By the end of that day, I'd sold them and had 2 others brought in for repair and restoration. It had gone on like that since. I did a few at a time, working when I could, and learning a lot along the way. Some of the bikes I worked on were old, like they might have been first ridden by my grandparents, and others were newer but had been ridden hard and needed repair. Ever since that first sale, the day with the bikes on the lawn, I'd carried the idea, the dream, really, of a proper shop where I could sell all sorts of bikes, new and used, take in some for repair, and maybe even teach people how to do simple repairs for themselves. I'd even doodled some ideas for a logo in a notebook in my garage. So that day when I stood with the roses in one hand and the brass doorknob in the other, and looked into the storefront, I didn't think twice. I just had a feeling it was time. I didn't know how it would all work, and I was a little nervous, but I thought of a piece of advice a friend had given me a while back. Stop waiting to feel ready. I'd called about the storefront that day, and a week later I was signing the lease, making a punch list of tasks to tackle to turn the space into what I wanted it to be. I painted and changed out light fixtures. My doodled logo was up in the front window and on cards by the register. I'd put an ad in the paper looking for old bikes for sale, and soon I had more than I could take. There was a small but sufficient workspace in the back of my new shop with a garage door that opened onto the alley, and I brought in my benches and tools. I'd spent an enjoyable day with music playing while I worked, hanging my wrenches on the new pegboards and organizing my toolboxes so they were neat and ready. The front of the shop had certainly taken more than a day, but I'd enjoyed that too. I picked out my favorite bikes to put in the window, and with some help hung lots of others from those high ceilings. I had displays of baskets and repair kits and flyers for our first do-it-yourself workshop. And as I worked, people walking by would point out the shop to each other from the sidewalk, or poke their heads in through the propped open door to ask when we'd be opening. It was a lovely feeling to know my shop was wanted, a reason for excitement in our little village. Opening day had been a blur, lots of folks coming to look and some to buy. I'd had the bakery make up a big tray of cookies to set by the register, which always helps, and now cookies were part of every Saturday at the shop. I kept a coffee pot by the register, and though I was usually the only one who partook, I had a few spare mugs I was happy to pour for customers who wanted to take their time as they perused. Talking about bikes and riding in my shop with a cup of coffee in my hand quickly became a favorite part of my day. Then a customer had an idea. It seemed our village was full of bicycle enthusiasts. Why not have a spring ride? We could meet here at the shop and follow a planned route and meet new friends, and if it was a hit, well, maybe we'd do them regularly through the summer. I couldn't believe I hadn't thought of it myself. I told each customer about it for weeks, handing out flyers and hoping for a good turnout. This morning, as I rode my bicycle from home and parked it in the rack by the door, I thought we'd picked a good day for it. Sunny and warm, but not humid. We'd need sunglasses, but not sweaters. I wasn't really opening the shop today, as I'd be riding along with the others, but I still went in and made a pot of coffee and turned on the lights. I liked watching the other shops on the street go through their own morning routines. Sandwich boards going out onto the sidewalks, and folks chit-chatting to each other as they swept their front steps and flipped their open signs. It was its own sort of fellowship to be a shopkeeper, and I was happy to have been welcomed into it. I set my coffee on the counter and picked up my clipboard, going up and down the aisles and checking inventory and making notes. That's when I heard the bells ringing. Lots of them. Bicycle bells, some of which I had sold and installed myself, as riders streamed down the street to my shop. I set down my clipboard and stepped outside with a big smile on my face. Within a few minutes, we had nearly 50 riders, and I reached for that old brass doorknob and pulled it shut and locked it behind me. Someone blew a whistle as I clipped on my helmet, and we were off. Flower Day at the market. We were inching closer to the cusp of summer, and you could feel it in the warm early mornings when the sun rose before anyone in the house was awake, and in the greening lawns and budding trees that lined the street. There were other signs. I'd watched the first baseball game of the season through the chain-link fence in the park. The sound of the ball clapping into the glove of the bat dropped onto the packed clay of the infield from a batter's hand as she dashed for first base, and the teasing talk and calls of, "Hey, batter," from the other team as the next player stepped up to the plate. In the afternoons, I'd noticed the windows of the school bus were pushed down as it stopped and let kids out on the corner, and they laughed louder and chased and played with that end-of-the-school-year giddiness that runs rampant in the last week or two of classes. And now it was Flower Day at the market, a sure sign that we are about to leave spring behind and step into the lush, bright days of summer. Our farmer's market was open year-round, though in the winter the outer stalls were empty, and inside, pickings were decidedly slim. You could find a few things grown in greenhouses, and lots of crafts, and the coffee stand stayed open to keep everyone supplied with hot drinks. But even on sunny days, the winter wind pushed drafts through the building, and the vendors wore coats and hats all day. Now all the doors and windows would be open. The halls and walkways full of shoppers and their carts. I couldn't wait. The market sat on the edge of downtown, and on Flower Day, the shops and cafes in the blocks around it joined in on the fun. I parked on a side street and wandered through the sidewalk sales, another sign of summer, and stopped to browse some cups and bowls set out in front of a little shop that sold kitchenwares. I don't know what it is about plates and teapots and little spoons, but I want to buy new sets of them every time I see them. I didn't, but I wanted to. These were plain white with rims in blue or dark red, and they reminded me of the dishes at the diner where my friends and I had met up for late-night coffees in high school. Oh, the plates of pancakes we had eaten, washing them down with so many refilled cups of coffee, then each gone home to sleep like babies, despite the caffeine, only waking when we were pried out of bed by a determined parent. I set the cup down, but couldn't resist a couple of the tiny mismatched spoons displayed in a jam jar. They were just $1 a piece, and they felt very necessary as I held them in my hand and imagined stirring sugar into my tea. The shop owner took my dollars and wrapped the spoons in a piece of brown paper, and I slipped them into my bag and walked on toward the market. At the cafe, there was a little stage set up by the outdoor tables, and a few people plugging in microphones and a guitar and a keyboard. They tuned up as I walked past, and I thought about the effort and guts it must take to stand in front of even just a few people and play and sing. It made me smile at a stranger's determination, simply glad that there are people like that in the world. The lot at the market was bustling as I walked through the rows and closer to the covered stalls. It's called Flower Day for a reason. There were flowers everywhere, in pots sitting along the edge of every walkway, hanging from hooks along each booth, flats of perennials and annuals stretched out on tables, dripping from their morning watering. There were full-grown hydrangeas and lilies and even lilac shrubs and red dogwoods in large pots. People were pulling wagons with ivy trailing down behind them or carrying pots in their arms. And everywhere you turned, there was color and blooming and sweet scents. After a long winter, it felt like I'd suddenly been plunged from black and white into Technicolor. And I tucked into a spot out of the way for a few minutes and just watched the flowers and the people going by. I didn't have a cart or a wagon, so I had to be judicious with my purchases today, as I had been in choosing spoons over mugs and plates. From my spot, I surveyed the booths and stalls. What did I want? Our yard was well established, with long beds full of dahlias, peonies, sweet williams, and black-eyed Susans. So most years, I just added flower pots to the front porch steps to complete the scene. I folded myself into the crowd and started to look for a couple of pleasing pots. Not too big, but just right for the top step. Of course, there were a lot of geraniums, a solid standby, and zinnias and dianthus, but they did best in full sun, and because of the big sycamore in our front yard, our porch was mostly shaded. At a stall near the end, I found round baskets of flowers I couldn't quite name. They were yellow and red, and that lovely sunset orange I adored. The woman behind the counter told me that they were a begonia-camellia mix and would do very well in the shade. I paid for 2 baskets, and she kindly set them aside for me to pick up on my way out. I still wanted to wander a bit longer. Along with all these flowers, there were a lot of vegetable seedlings started and ready to be transplanted into gardens, and I nosily listened in on a couple, deciding how many peppers and how many eggplant seedlings to purchase. They wondered if they had enough tomatoes. Are there ever enough tomatoes, I wondered? When they come in strong at the end of the summer, full of flavor with their vines smelling so delicious. I had a flat in my hand before I knew what I was doing and laughed and set them back down. There was time, plenty of time to seed my garden. The market would be full of plants for weeks and weeks. Today was Flower Day. I stopped for a drink at the coffee stall. They had a few new cold drink options, and I tried a limeade mixed with sweet fizzy water, and it was absolutely refreshing and the best thing I'd tasted in a while. I still had the flavor on my tongue while I carried my pots back through the lot and toward my car. Limes, flowers, the bright sun above me, all the signs of summer were here. Today's stories make me want to head out to the shops and markets in my own local village. I mentioned at the top of the show one of the great modern fantasies, a walkable downtown adjacent life. And I am so lucky to have that where I am now. When I was 16, I moved to southern Italy, where I stayed for a year as a foreign exchange student. I was coming from Flint, Michigan, which, while being a fantastic place in other ways, was not in the 90s in any way walkable. Then suddenly I was in a place with functional mass transit, easy to use, affordable, and everyone used it. I got around so easily, and then there was so much of Salerno for me to walk through, and I really fell in love with that lifestyle. It was very hard for me to adapt to coming home. I had sort of reverse culture shock at the end of my stay. My mom reminded me that for months I'd walk around the perimeter of the house after dinner because I couldn't just settle in to sitting. I needed to walk. I'm not totally sure where I'm going with all of this. This is the Kathryn Rambles now, part of the show. But often listeners from the U.S. say that the stories of Nothing Much resonate on a dream level for most of us, but not on an experiential level. And I think that year of living somewhere walkable and easy to navigate is why. I'm still telling stories about the way I lived then. Also, and I know that there are a lot of problems for us to fix before we get to this, but if you have a chance to opt for more mass transit where you live, I think it's always a good thing. It connects us more to each other and where we live and gets people to the resources they need. And that is something that can make life better for everyone. Simple as that. So our first story today was about the hardware store. And when I was going over it, I remembered getting a DM from someone asking me to write a story about a woman who was a maker, who did woodworking and handywoman type things. And I pointed her to this episode thinking, oh, she must have missed it. That happens a lot since folks are often asleep while listening to my stuff. And she said, yeah, I know. Write more. More of that. And I loved that moment because I realized that person felt seen and wanted to experience more of that storyline, which is always a goal of mine, but also that I didn't have to completely reinvent the Nothing Much wheel every time I created an episode. I was very conscious of trying to tell a whole new kind of story each week and learned that often folks are happy to hear something sort of similar, especially in this comfort genre. Phew. Since meeting my wife, I have become much more adept at fixing stuff. Or is that the most accurate way to say it? I'm not intimidated anymore when stuff breaks. That's probably more of it. I didn't grow up in a family where anyone was handy. No one. So when things broke at our house, it did kind of feel like we were just going to have to live with broken stuff or just like close the door and never go in that room again. And my wife was just like, we can figure this out. Or someone we can call can figure it out. And that was really empowering to me. I think while I have no experience with woodworking on the level of this narrator, I was leaning into the feeling of enjoying stuff that might have previously induced anxiety. After this episode came out, I heard from some listeners in other countries who were fascinated by the idea that a hardware store would have a large candy selection. And I guess it is a little strange when you think about it. Like, what's the connection there? Besides that candy's yummy and grown-ups can buy it when they want. But if you live somewhere where candy proliferates in unexpected places, please send us an email. I want to know about it. That is my cup of tea. Next, we were off to the bicycle shop, which was a really fun episode to write and has become a mainstay in the village. This narrator has appeared in many other storylines. I wonder about that dream of opening a shop. If other people really do share it. I had that dream, I lived it, and it had its magical moments. Right now, there is a bed and breakfast for sale near me, and I have to keep reminding myself that I do not have time for that. No, Kathryn. You are not actually the innkeeper. Put it down. In a section where I was describing the bikes, I used the word bumper where I should have said fender and got absolutely roasted in my own comment section for this. I think I'm not going to make any further comments there. I just want to say roasted to a crisp. Finally, we headed over to the farmer's market for Flower Day. A Flower Day is a very big deal at the Detroit market called Eastern Market. And while I do not enjoy large crowds, so do not myself attend that day, I can say Eastern Market is an absolute jewel. We get our Christmas tree there every year. There are multiple sheds, which are not sheds at all, but beautiful old brick buildings. So many vendors, live music, tons of fruit and veg and small business food operations, and big community organizations. Detroit is a marvel, and the people are top tier. Come visit us. Thanks as always for spending some time with me in the Village of Nothing Much today. We'll be back next week. Oh, next week is Walking Tour Week. I'm already excited. So till then, I wish for you the scent of fresh milled lumber, the sound of a bike bell, and the energy of a bustling market.